Okay, are we good? So do you have anything you want to say, Eric, before I jump in? Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. First of all, I just want to do a shout out to Eric. Eric does my technology. Eric does everything. He does my scheduling for my trainings. I know when the pandemic hit, I called him crying and said, "Oh my God, what are we going to do?" And we did more EMDR basic trainings than any other trainer in the world that year because of Eric. So, anyway, so huge shout out to Eric. If you need anything, just send him a chat and he'll take care of you. Um, Thank you for being here. This is a really important chapter, and I just want to put out there before we head into it, I am going to honor it. This is about exiles, and this is a really difficult aspect of internal family systems work. In fact, it's tough to get good teaching on this. And we absolutely need it if we're working with complex trauma, because with complex trauma, the more complex it is, the more layers of protectors there are, the more layers of protectors there are. You've got more polarized parts, the more polarized parts. It's really difficult to get to the memories. And that's what we are. Well, a lot of us are EMDR therapists, but you don't need to be it to be in this presentation. But we are here to do the memory work, and we need to get to the memories. And the memories are held by the exiles, and they're called exiles for a reason. They are exiled. So they're the wounded children, and they're the ones that need our love and our care and our clients' ability to nurture them. And so, okay. So I'm going to go through this chapter with as much time as we need. And if we end up only doing a chapter today, then I'm okay with that. So with that being said, let's jump in. Let's just get going. So healing emotional wounds. Before we do anything, I want to introduce this slide that I use in my advanced trainings, all of my other advanced trainings. Whenever we talk about validating, which is very different than doing our 6Fs, it is validating is all about building self-energy. And so we have an acronym for it just so that we can refer to it easily. It's about hearing, understanding, getting, and seeing. That's it. We're not about appreciating or acknowledging or building trust. You know, there's a whole lineup of things that we do later on when we have that self-to-part energy. But right now, we're going to be talking a lot about direct access. And to build self-energy for a client, we want to mentor hearing the part, understanding the part, getting the part, and seeing the part. And I love this. You hug your client's parts without touching them. So it all works out. So just know that when I say hugs, this is what I'm referring to. So we're going to get into the first couple slides that are going to be review, and then we're going to get to the meat of the work. So just talking about exiled parts, you know, we're in chapter 23 now, so we've talked about a lot of aspects of internal family systems, but here we are with the exiled parts. These are the parts that are holding the trauma, and they're often buried and hard to get to, hence the name exiled. I love the visual of a castle and having that part exiled into the castle, and then all of the protector parts in front of the castle saying, no entry, you're not going there. These parts are subtly influenced daily. So they're activated on a regular basis in that we see triggers that can activate our how we like with our neuroception and our polyvagal theory, how we're reacting is all coming from, and our root cause and our earliest memories are being held with these parts. And many clients seek to fix these past by reenacting the present. I know when I first started out as a therapist, I studied Imago, and that was going to be the couples work that I was going to do. And Imago basically talks about how you go find the same person that can assist with the wounds that you're experiencing. So if I have a hole in my heart that has to do with neglect, I'm going to go out, I'm going to find somebody to fill that hole. But unfortunately, I'm going to pick somebody that's going to be just like the person that hurt me to begin with. So we see that reenactment over and over and over. And the clients, will think if I love well enough, maybe I'll finally be loved in return. So we get, like, for example, some codependence. And this cycle often fails and creates a re-traumatized system. Often, I would say most of the time. The self-led healing in eternal family systems, we have self, and higher self is not a part. In fact, higher self doesn't even have language. Higher self is an energy. It's an essence. I like to say when you're at the top of a mountain, if you're ever lucky enough to be at the top of the mountain, and you're able to just the awe, the nonverbal, that is higher self. So it's a really tough thing to put language to when we're trying to teach it and work with it. But we have a lot of what are called self-led parts and self-like parts. And so at the end of the day, self is the leader. And that's what we're going towards. When working with complex trauma, like Frank's book is all about complex trauma, that higher self is really hard to find. So we're not going to expect it to show up right away. But we are going to be working with self-led or self-like parts, which are going to have language. And they will also show up as a part normally would, with maybe other aspects that might have like some judgment in it. So we just need to keep an eye on that. IFS offers us a different kind of redo, not a redo that you do externally in an external locus of control, but internally. And this is where the hope is right now. Our external world is kind of crazy and really stressful for a lot of people, but this is where the work is. And so that's something that we can tell our clients that we can work with. We can't control people, places, things, but we can control what's going on here. And that's the work that we're doing. And that redo is going to be self-led. And the true healing comes from within, not from rescuers. Once again, kind of gives us a lot of hope and healing around our current environment. The self is calm, it's curious, it's compassionate. It's the ideal healer for those exiles. And the inner corrective experience avoids repeating painful experiences and painful patterns. We're really in the position of our job is about pattern recognition. And so we're looking to change those. We want to get in there and re-encode what it is that the client has been experiencing over and over and over again. And we want that to change. I love this visual, working with the exiles. The exiles are exiled away. As you can see this little exile up here at the top of the castle. And here's self coming down the road, and there are the protector parts. We need to figure out how to build self for our clients. This is not an easy task. We need to figure out how to work through all the protectors. Then when we get to the exile, we need to figure out how to work with them. And that's what we're talking about today. We want to work gently with them. There's going to be victim energy that may surface subtly under a caretaker. And victim energy is like an emotional residue. It's an inner experience of helplessness. So it's not a separate part. And so, for example, an exile may hold this like, no one helped me, or I was all alone, which is all very true. And so we want to be thinking that this victim energy is going to be there, and we want to work with it, not from a perspective of, oh, it's another part, but that it is in fact something that the exile holds. And so we want to name this energy, and we want to use our hugs. We want to hear it, understand it, get it, and see it without overwhelming the protectors. You can have an exile show up without permission, and just kind of bust through the protectors and be like, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. And our job as therapists are just to use like implicit direct access and to just acknowledge and to gently work with the exile. Because at the end of the day, we still have to go back and get permission from the protectors. If we start working with it too aggressively, the protectors will lash out in some way, shape, or form. So we want to just treat it with a way where we can soften it up and build trust with it. But literally, we're going to be putting it back where it was and working with the protectors first. Healing complex trauma is not linear, even though I like to make it linear. That's kind of the thing that I do with my math and science brain. But it unfolds over time, and there's multiple exiles, often holding very similar and related wounds. The protectors also hold burdens and need attention and care. So the self energy brings a lot of hope and healing to the whole system, piece by piece, layer by layer. We always say the more hysterical, the more historical, in that the more symptoms that you see, the more history there is, which means there's going to be more implicit nonverbal exiles that we're going to be looking to work with eventually. Clients may unconsciously express a wounded victim energy. So this is often an exile's indirect plea to be seen, known, or rescued. So what does that look like? That just looks like you're setting up working with a protector, and all of a sudden a very young exile comes busting out into the session, and it's usually acting very young. It's tantrumy, it doesn't have language, and it really is just saying that it wants to be seen, it wants to be heard. And once again, we don't really have permission to work with it. And so we want to use our own indirect access in order to, once again, be attuned to it. We want to use our hugs. We want to use hear it, understand it, get it, see it. We want to name what's happening with the protectors, so that once again, it's like if you were doing a family session and you had a child off on the side, maybe they had them on their iPad or something, and all of a sudden they just started crying hysterically. We don't have permission from the parents to work with the child from a therapeutic perspective, but we want to all calm the child down so that we can get back to the work that we're doing. And the reason why that child is acting out to begin with is because it needs our attention for some reason. So that's an easy way to think about it. We're going to put that child back where it was until the protectors are ready for us to go in and do the actual memory work with the exile. Using self-energy is gently noticed and named what's beneath the surface. So in other words, we've got this ability to speak beyond the protectors whenever we're sharing with the system, even though maybe we're directing it to the protectors. All aspects of the client can hear what's going on. And so we want to hold this energy softly, once again, using hugs. I hear you, I understand you, I get you, I see you. That's the theme that we are basically putting out there for all parts of the system to hear. It helps the whole system feel safe and hopeful, even though we're not going in there directly. I do a lot of work with very, very complex trauma. I've got a couple DID clients, and they'll have what we call alters that can be, they can be dangerous. They can come in and want to hurt the client right in the session. They may hurt the client when they're outside of the session. At the end of the day, they were taught to hurt. When you have a perpetrator, the worst thing that can happen to a perpetrator is they can get found out. And so what does a perpetrator do? It threatens the client. So the client's going to have a part that represents that. And that part's going to want to hurt the client if the client starts sharing too much with you. And so once again, we need to think of a way to work with these parts from a perspective of, I'm here, I'm the therapist for all parts, I'm here for all of you, we're all on this journey together, sending that message out to the whole system constantly, without it being like maybe directly like in the castle saying, hey, I'm here for you too, but the castle can hear you. Self-led witnessing can build trust. Anytime that we are bringing self-energy into the session, and we'll be talking more about that in a minute, we are mentoring it for the client to also be bringing self-led energy into the system. So it takes time, and the sequence matters. I have to repeat that. It takes time. The complex trauma, just like with EMDR, oh, if we do PTSD, you're out the door in 8 sessions. And it's true. If you have a one-time criterion A event working with a cognition, that client's out the door in 8 sessions. But if you're working with complex trauma and you're working with belief sequences and schemas, and you're working with a lifetime of inescapable chronic where the attachment ruptures. This is going to take time. So it's the same thing with our parts work. Now, I do love the fact that with EMDR, the work that we do is transformative. And with parts work, you have to do it for 21 days. And we'll talk about that later. That is kind of disheartening for someone like myself who likes to get things done. But on the other hand, it's also teaching me a lot about taking a step back and being present. But we'll get to that. So healing one exile may not resolve the entire system. It won't. Relational trauma often involves multiple exiles. And so relational trauma is what we're looking at when we're going into complex trauma. Protectors carry their own pain and burdens, and that also will need healing. And so healing's not linear. It's going to be relational, it's going to be cumulative, and it's going to be layered. And so honor the order of operations set up by the system. And I love parts mapping. We also do what's called neural network mapping in the EMDR basic trainings. And basically it's what energy wants attention first? What energy is right here in front of us, and what parts want the attention first? So just take the order of what is showing up, because at the end of the day, you're not going to get where you want to go until you work with what's in front of you anyway. And then healing does have its own sequence. Let the client system lead the order of healing. And then trauma lists can be helpful, but they're not the roadmap. And so, once again, I'm going to go back to EMDR because I'm an EMDR basic trainer, consultant, therapist. And I know that in the olden days, we used to make a list of 10 worst traumas, and then that would be what we work on. We don't do that anymore. We really want to map the client system and do it from a perspective of data collection. And then we want to ask the client what it is that they would prefer to do. We want to go, like I said, where the energy is. We're seeing a lot of crisis sessions these days where the clients are coming in and they're just super dysregulated by all the things that are going on in the world. And to be honest with you, those are the parts we want to start with. And from an EMDR perspective, those are the targets that we want to work with. And we'll see a little bit about how that works in a few minutes. Healing often moves from less intense to more painful wounds. And so if that's how the client wants to work on it, that sounds like a really secure plan, a plan that might harbor some safety. And then the protective parts may push for control. We want to get in there and we want to help them relax. And so working with those protector parts is first and foremost. And like I said, there's going to be layers and layers and layers of them, especially as we're working with complex trauma. When parts carry false responsibility, so a lot of times, well, most of the time, a client is when they are a child, they take on the blame. They take on the responsibility. It's my fault. If no one, what Frank Andersen says is that the only way for a rupture to be okay is if there's a repair. And so if there isn't a repair, then the rupture is what ends up becoming fragmented. It ends up becoming stored maladaptively, especially if it happens over and over and over and over and over again. And so for a child to then figure out how they're going to get their attachment needs met and how they're going to fit into a family system, they need to take on that blame for themselves. And so if it's my fault, that means that you're okay. You're a good parent. It also means that if it's my fault, I can work to improve the situation. I can take on the responsibility. And so the client system absorbs all the blame. And these beliefs can be deeply blended and feel like truths. And once again, that's where our EMDR comes in, because when we're looking at a negative belief, once called cognition, but really it's a belief, it is deep. It is a schema. It's been there since birth, prior to birth, in utero, generational, generation after generation, past lives. It all depends on, the perspective that your client comes from. And statements like, if I had said or done something different, often signals this internalized blame. I remember a client who experienced a lot of abuse as a very young girl, and she'd always say, if I hadn't worn that pink dress, if I hadn't worn that pink dress, I don't know why I always had to wear that pink dress. She was 5, and then all the older parts are yelling at her, you were at fault. You wore that pink dress. I mean, we all know as adults that a 5-year-old has no idea what it would mean to wear a pink dress and why that would create the horrific abuse that that client experienced. But that is what that part is holding. And so our job and our goal is to get to that part and to work with that part. And parts holding the beliefs are trying to make sense of being completely powerless and in pain. So trying to give language to their experience that helps them in service of survival. So self as the great normalizer, once again, here we are with this self-energy, self-like parts, self-led parts. Self-energy is more impactful than therapist insight when challenging distorted beliefs. So we want to invite self to speak to the part, something that's calm, compassionate, and clear. But I'm going to do a kind of a timeout here and just say very clearly, our complex trauma clients don't have higher self. We can read all we want about higher self, but it is hard to find it. And so we, the therapists, are going to represent that higher self. We need our higher self energy to show up. And then our higher self energy is mentoring for our client. And then at some point, you're going to make that connection and you're going to hand over what it is that you have been mentoring for the client to the client so that they then can house that self energy to then take care of their own parts. So there's this process that's always going on, and really it's going to be your self energy that shows up first. And that's why, Frank very boldly says, what parts of yours are activated? Because we need your parts to also be softening back. We need your higher self to be there with the client. And so then back to the slide, these beliefs that our clients are holding, they emerge subtly. So listen closely in casual conversation for the language of, I'm always alone, or I'm just not good enough, or people just don't like me, or I'm just, nobody ever listens to me. Once again, if you're EMDR trained, this is easier for us because we're already working with these negative beliefs. We've already tried to identify what those negative neural networks look like, but that's exactly what we're doing here also. We're naming the belief that begins the path to the connection and the unburdening. We want to put language to that experience that the client is experiencing through their senses and not necessarily language. And when the self is present, the part can finally receive the truth it needed all along. And then once again, we're always going to be incorporating hugs. So this is the summary of the different types of complex trauma wounds. And we just went over these before we move into how we're going to specifically work with exiles. But you've got your one exile carrying several wounds. You've got your developmental wounds, which are going to be many, many exiles. You've got wounds that are connected to each parent. You have what's called double trauma because you have what's happening today, which is triggered by the past. In my world, we always have this with our complex trauma. And then we have multiple wounds that are connected to multiple traumas. And the one I just want to point out here, because we talk about it all the time in our basic training, is the double trauma. So I just put a nice representation over here. If you got trained by me, you've heard me say this a million times, but the 20/80 rule talks about 20% of what's happening to you today is about today, and 80% comes from the past. And we're looking for those past-present connections. That at the end of the day, that's what our adaptive information processing model is doing. But also, it's internal family systems, because this is where our protectors and our exiles are. And we want to link, bind, or connect them to what it is that the higher self and self-like and self-led parts are able to bring to the table. So I'm going to take a sip of my drink. And does anybody have any questions coming up? I feel like some of this is review, which is good. And if it's not, that's good too. Eric, anything?
Nothing's coming up in chat, but this self-led energy part, that can be so hard to find and accurately sort of depict. I like using a definition with my clients that comes from Jung, that the adult sees reality as it is, not and so that's the way that I like to work with self, is a reality seer, not that you can see all of reality, but that you see more of reality as it is. So.
Yeah, that's nice because that's individual to each client. I like that. Yeah, beautiful. Okay. Okay. So, Adrian.
Hi, Paula. So I wasn't using the IFS model, and I've been working with inner child work on myself. And I'm just wondering what your take is on that, because it just feels like there's more resistance than ever, which would make sense from the IFS viewpoint that,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
And so I have to admit, that's why I've transitioned over to internal family systems language, because it's easier to teach parts work. You are running into resistance. And, Dick Schwartz will say, I have language for everything. And he's not kidding. So he does. So the language basically is, you're running into these protector parts, these rows and rows of protector parts that are basically saying, hold up, we're here to protect those younger child parts. And we need to work through them in order to get to the earliest memories. So hopefully, as we go into this, because I'm going to actually use a real client as a story on how to get to those memories, hopefully that'll be helpful for you.
Thank you.
Yes, but I totally agree with you. So how trauma's held in the system. Once again, we've got the collective wounds where one exile holds multiple traumas. I can't say that I've ever run into somebody who has one exile, but the developmental wounds, and that's most likely because we're working with developmental trauma, and developmental trauma is going to be wound after wound after wound after wound. And these wounds can be in a perspective of being in a developmental context, or you could just have exiles that are holding many of the different wounds. The parental dynamics, we've got parental pairing wounds where each parent contributes to very specific wounds, and that would make sense. In fact, Frank talks about attachment styles, in that he had many different attachment styles going with each parent. And so he would have a secure attachment with some of his mother's parts, but then he would also have an insecure attachment with some of his mother's other parts. And so, when you look at it from that perspective, it kind of takes like that whole idea of what attachment style did our client experience, kind of throw that out the window, because at the end of the day, each part is experiencing something different from possibly the mother or the father or other primary caregivers. One parent is abusive, the other's passive or absent. That can result in two core wounds. Common in clients with borderline personality disorder or disorganized attachment. We've got a lot of relational wounding. And so working with our clients from a IFS perspective is beautiful, because there is no pathology, there is no judgment, there is no diagnosis per se, even though you would probably need it for some type of insurance coverage. Pairings can also stem from two hyper or hypoaroused parents, leaving the child with no counterbalance or safe refuge. And once again, complex trauma, that's generally what we're coming away with. You can have a very abusive parent and the other parent is very passive. And so that's super confusing, because nobody is keeping that client safe. When past traumas echo into the present, that's that past-present connection. Once again, that's that 2080 that we talk about. That's pattern recognition. That's the adaptive information processing model, talking about going into the past, that was then, going into the child parts that are holding the memories, and link binding or connecting them to the adult, to our current day, what it is that our clients would prefer for themselves. One way that we can access that, though, is looking, Frank calls it secondary traumas. What trauma is it that's connected to the past? So if I have, for example, a client that's very, very triggered by our current political environment, she's one of the few clients where I'm really working intensely on her past because her father was a raging, terrifying person. And so she's getting very activated by a lot of the politics today. And yes, they're terrifying, but the way she's reacting is going to put her family at risk. And so we want to really be working with the past in order to start calming down the present. And so it's how we look at our client through like an AIP lens. But healing both is going to be essential at the end of the day. So once again, our complex trauma is layered. So we've got different pieces, and we need to go in and find those multiple parts, and we work on the multiple parts, and we work on the part that's presenting itself as we figure out like what what order we're going to be working with. We go with the parts that have the most energy. So if I, for example, I just did a training this weekend, and we talked a lot about using the DES and the color-coded DS, and why in my world it's essential, because I know a lot of people don't feel that way. And then a therapist said, well, what happens if my client doesn't want to do the DS? And I said, oh, well, let's pull out Gestalt, put your DS in the chair, and ask your client, what is it feeling toward that DS? And the client says, oh, that thing's stupid. I don't want anything to do with that. That's the part you're going to work with. That everything is a part. Everyone is a part. Your client is there and saying, I can't talk. I'm so nauseous right now. Just everything in this world's making me sick. Well, let's go to nauseous. It's a part. How can we work with that part? How can we? Nauseous is going to be a nonverbal part. But like I said, if we look at everything from a parts perspective, it makes therapy so much easier. So I'm just very grateful for this orientation and how it helps us kind of unravel a lot of what's been coming into our offices lately. So just once again, to kind of wrap this up, looking at the 2080, this is what's happening today for our clients. This is all the stuff in the past. This is where we need to go. This is where childhood rejection, attachment wounds, early fears and helplessness. This is all unconscious, implicit in the brain structures that do not engage the prefrontal cortex. And our goal is to get in there and start working with these aspects of the client. And so how do we do that? And that is going to be our next step. So I really went to town on this part of Frank's chapter because this is a really difficult concept. And so working with the exiles, they have what's called exile hunters. And I guess that's what I was for a while there. Exile hunters are those therapists that are always looking for the exiles, and they're not really taking into consideration all the work that needs to be done to get there. You have to earn your way to get to the exiles, and the exiles are the wounded child parts. The exiles are the memories, the original memories, the original fear that is the root cause of what the client has been experiencing their whole life. So as a trauma-informed therapist, that is my goal. So the way that Frank, he sets it up into 6 steps, and I don't know if this is congruent with how Dick Schwartz sets it up. I'm assuming, Dick Schwartz was his therapist and they work closely together, but this is Frank's book, so we're honoring his work. And so we're going to look at these 6 steps from protection to connection, where we witness, we do a do-over, we have retrieval, we upload, there's an invitation, and then there's integration. And I could sit here and I could give you a slide for every single one of these, and we could just, kind of maybe think that we know what we're talking about. But what I decided to do is to take a client experience and bring this to life, I guess that you would say. So let's see here. Let me just look. Before we move into, let me just look at something. I want to see what order I have everything here. We have a video we have to watch. Okay. All right. So before we move into this, I'm going to read a story to you. So I'm going to read the story to you. Then we're going to watch a video that Gabramonte is going to talk about what our goals are, just 4 minutes. And then we're going to go through each aspect with this client, how we witnessed, how we did a do-over, how we did retrieval, then we uploaded, then we had an invitation, and then we did integration. And it's all going to be with this story of this client. So I want you to close your eyes, or if you're not paying attention, I want you to pay attention because you're going to be lost. And it's a story. Everybody can handle a story. It's a story of a lonely parts healing journey. Okay, so how do we make this a story? I love stories. I'm Irish. All right. Once upon a time, hidden deep inside, there was a part called lonely. She lived quietly behind two very fierce protector parts. One was an angry part, and the other was an overeating part. And I'm going to do a timeout right there. The angry part, we usually have polyvagal, just like my best friend. And we have two parts, and we're going to talk about they're polarized. And usually one is sympathetic energy and one is dorsal vagal energy. So the angry part is the sympathetic yellow energy, and the overeating part is going to be the dorsal vagal shutdown energy, because the overeating puts this client into a dissociation. So I just want to point that out. So okay. Once upon a time, hidden deep inside was the lonely part. She was quietly behind two fierce protector parts, the anger part, which was yellow, and the overeating part, which was red. For years, they had stood guard, believing that if anyone came too close, lonely would be hurt again. Their protection was fierce, but it came from love. One day, a new presence arrived, the higher self, calm, compassionate, open, patient. And instead of pushing past the protector parts, higher self paused. Higher self listened. Higher self respected the reason for standing guard. Slowly, the anger part and the overeating part softened, realizing that this was new self energy that could be trusted. And they were polarized, but then they were on the same page. Another timeout. Polarization is another chapter. I am going to do one slide on the review. So you will see that as we go through our slides. So behind the two parts, once they were on the same page, is where lonely was. And lonely peeked out. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was seen by others, really, really seen, and they were not afraid of her sadness. Higher self approached gently, with no demands, only warmth. Lonely found the courage to share her story and was truly witnessed. She spoke of the deep grief she carried, the pain of losing her father, the emptiness that had filled her life when she was a child. Higher self listened with open hands and an open heart, not fixing, not rushing in, not problem solving, just being there, hearing, understanding, getting, seeing. Hugs. Even though the protectors stayed close by, quietly witnessing the truth of what it had been, carried alone for so long. Then came the do-over. Higher self asked, "What did you need back then when you didn't get it?" And together they imagined it. Lonely and higher self talked of love and safety and a sense of belonging. Higher self wrapped those gifts around lonely like a blanket, providing what had been missing at the time it was needed most. After the do-over came the retrieval. Hand in hand, higher self gently led Lonely out of the darkness, out of the traumatic scene, away from the sorrow, away from the isolation, and into a new space. A new space that was requested by Lonely. A concert hall alive with music, light, and joyful connection. There, surrounded by music and movement, Lonely began to dance. The grief and loneliness that had weighted her down began to lift. Uploaded, first like small sparks, then like beams of light raising into the sky, higher self stood by her side as she lifted her hands in celebration and let go of the burdens of the past that were released into the rainbow of healing energy above them. As the music swirled around them, higher self offered Lonely new gifts to carry, new gifts called boundaries, self-worth, the ability to choose connection without losing herself. And then there was an invitation. The Lonely part received the gift of authenticity, not as burdens, not as a birthright, but feeling the strength where there had once been emptiness. Emptiness in service of survival due to the attachment ruptures that loneliness experienced. Lonely received them with open arms, not because she had to, because she was ready. Now the system stands together, lonely, angry, overeating, higher self. Each part is unique, each part is alive, but no longer trapped in old fears. Integration. They are connected now, held not by protection alone, but by trust, love, and enduring sense of belonging. This is the journey from protection to connection, from burden to freedom, from loneliness to life. And this is a true story. So let's see what this looks like, because now we're going to break it down according to the parts, now that you've heard the story. So first, we're going to listen to Gabramonte tell us, this is my favorite video. Well, he's got a lot of great videos. Attachment versus authenticity. He truly, with his heart, talks about how we have to be who we have to be. We're like almost groomed to be who we are, and that involves the shame that's attached to it and the burdens that are attached to it. We are attached to this because of our need to survive in a very dangerous environment, and that we sacrifice our authenticity. Lonely lived in what was attachment ruptures in order to stay alive, and the redo and the retrieval brought her into authenticity, what she wanted for herself. And so let's hear what Gabramonte has to say before we move forward.
When a child is born, the child has two needs. The first need is for attachment. And attachment is contact, connection, love. Without that, the human child does not survive. Any mammalian child or even an avian child doesn't survive. So that as soon as you get past the level of reptiles, the reptile is hatched, the mother's long gone by then, and the reptile infant either lives or dies, but there's no attachment to a parenting figure. As soon as you get to the level of birds now, the baby bird has to have an attachment with the parents. The parents have to be attached to the baby. Otherwise, the infant simply does not survive. Mammalians even more so, and most so the human, because we're the least developed, the least mature, with the least developed brains, and the most dependent for the longest period of time of any creature in the universe. So our attachment needs are enormous, and they remain important throughout lifetime because we have to have attachments to form societies, social groups, without which we don't survive. So attachment is a huge need. We have to connect, belong, be loved by, and love. That's just a basic human need. But we have another need as well, which is for authenticity. Authenticity is the capacity, as I said earlier, to know what we feel, to be in touch with our bodies, and to be able to express who we are and manifest who we are in our activities and in our relationships. Now, why is that? Well, think of a human being in the evolutionary period who's not in touch with their body and their gut feelings. How long do they survive out there in the wild? So authenticity is another huge survival need. Great. So far, so good. But what happens to a child where the attachment need is not compatible with the need for authenticity. In other words, if I'm authentic, my parents will reject me. If I feel what I feel and express what I feel and insist on my own truth, my parents can't handle it. And parents convey those messages unconsciously all the time. Not because they mean to, not because they don't love the child, not because they're not trying to do their best, but because they themselves are suppressed or traumatized or hurt or stressed. So I convey that message many times to my children, believe me, without any conscious desire to do so. In fact, it was the very opposite of what I wished to convey. But that they're not acceptable the way they are, with their emotions the way they are, that's the message my kids got when they were small. And most children get that in our society. Now, what does the child do with that? Well, if I give up my attachment for the sake of authenticity, I lose my relationships on which my life depends. Therefore, there's no question. What becomes suppressed is our authenticity, our emotions. And then we become 25 and 30 or 35, 40, and we don't know who we are. And somebody asks us, what do you feel? You say, I have no idea. And how many times we've all had the experience of having an inkling of a strong gut feeling, but we're ignoring it and we get into trouble? Well, that tells us what happened. What happened was that at some point we found out it was too costly for our attachment relationships to be in touch with our gut feelings. So then it becomes not our first nature, but our second nature, to suppress our feelings, to lose touch with ourselves, and to suppress our gut feelings. And then we pay the cost later on in the form of addictions, mental illness, or any range of physical illnesses. But it all began with this tragic conflict that children should never be confronted with, but are all the time, between authenticity on the one hand and attachment on the other. And even as adults, so many people are suffering because they want to be themselves, but they're afraid to be because they know, or at least they fear, that if they're themselves, they're going to lose important attachment relationships in their lives.
That's dramatic music. Okay, good. Thank you, Gabor. All right. So, just that transition of the child that we're going to be working with, lonely, moving into the concert hall, being brought there by self, that's the transition from attachment to authenticity that Gabor's referring to. So I thought that was a beautiful place for us to put that video, which is one of my favorites. Okay, so let's move into this. So important preparation. So our goal is full unburdening, okay? And this is something that Frank says, you're not supposed to do work with exiles and do a full unburdening until you take your level 1 IFS training. Now, I don't know what to say about that. I took my IFS training up in Canada because I couldn't get into a IFS training, and I'm a trauma-informed therapist, and I teach a lot of therapists, and you're telling me that I can't work with exiles and you can't get me into a training. So, I mean, I solved the problem. I'm not upset about it. My choice was excellent. I love what they do up in Canada. It was Derek Scott's group, and it was recommended by Frank Andersen. So it's all good. But I just want to put it out there. It's easier said than done to get into a level 1 IFS training, even though I have to admit they've added a lot recently. So that's good. If not fully trained, continue working with the protectors only. Once again, I'm just telling you what the book says. I don't necessarily agree with this. Protectors must give full permission before meeting exiles. That's absolutely true. Safety first. Honor the vulnerability of the system. And safety is always our number 1 intervention. It is our number 1 treatment plan. So just to review, Frank's saying, in order to do this work, you need to be level 1 trained. And in order to do this work, if you aren't level 1 trained, then you need to just work with protectors. And I am not going to go against anything Frank says. And at the end of the day, I did a workaround for myself. I would recommend that you do the same. Okay, so now that we've got that behind us, now we're going to move into working with this lonely part. Okay.
Touching my ear. Okay.
And so we're going to connect with all the protective parts that are guarding it. We want to get clear permission before moving forward. We needed trust and collaboration to set the foundation for the healing. I needed to make sure that the client's higher self was ready to meet the exile, to help the exile see the client's present day self, and to make sure the exile knows it's no longer alone and no longer stuck in the past. These are the goals. And so our players here are going to be the two protector parts. We have to work with them first. We have to make sure the client has a higher self, and we have to know that there's an exile that we're working toward. And so that's our setup. So this is a review from another chapter, working with polarized parts. But the first thing that I had to do was work with the two polarized parts, because they were going at each other. The overeating part would overeat, and the angry part would be pissed off. And so these two were like, and I didn't know that lonely was underneath. I only knew that I was working with these parts because the client came in and said, I have an overeating part. I want to work with it. I'm sick of eating late at night. I feel like crap in the morning. And that's how this whole thing started. And so the first thing that we do is we find the polarized parts and we put them on a couch, and we literally are doing couples therapy. And we talked about this in one of the other chapters. And so at the end of the day, just a real quick review, I say to the overeating part, why is it that you're overeating? What is it that's coming up for you? If you could share with us. And the overeating is like, it's fun. This is what we do at night after you work all day. This is our treat. This is how we take care of ourselves. We don't really do anything other than work and take care of the kids. And so this is my time, and don't take overeating away from me, because I make the system happy. We're like, oh yeah, yeah, okay, cool. Even the angry part is like, okay, I understand why that overeating part is here. That's basically the only time you get to be by yourself after working a full-time job, taking care of a family, and everything else that person is doing. The angry part, on the other hand, is like, we have to stop this. You are you're not healthy. You're putting on weight. You're not exercising. Your knees are hurting. Your hips are hurting. Like, seriously, like, we can't do this anymore. And so I say, yeah, oh my gosh, you're so right. This is couples therapy. You can't side with either one. So you're so right. And then you say to the overeating part, can you understand why this part's angry? And the part's like, yeah, I can understand it. So you've got two parts that understand each other. They don't agree with each other, but they understand each other. That is the key to working with a polarization, because once you get them on the same page, you can say, hey, by the way, what are you guys protecting? What is it that's underneath all of this? Who's under that couch, by the way? And it was loneliness. Overeating was there for loneliness, and the angry part was there for loneliness. And that's how we figured out who the exile was that we needed to get to. Now, don't think this all happened in like a couple sessions. It happened in many sessions. So here are Frank's steps that we're going to do. Now that we've identified the protectors, we've gotten their permission, and we have figured out what exile we're going to go see. First step of the unburdening process is to witness. So we invite the exile to share its full story. And its full story was really heartbreaking. Its full story was when, well, there was a couple different stories that went all the way back, but basically raised in a family of alcoholics, never felt that they were ever taken care of, felt like they were always neglected. When one of the parents passed away, literally turned to food for comfort, and basically used food for comfort throughout their whole life. And so as this part's telling its story, everybody's listening. The self is listening. The higher self is listening without judgment, without trying to fix anything, just witnessing with an open heart and with lots of compassion. And even angry and overeating parts stood back listening too, because their defenses were definitely softening as they were hearing this story of grief and overwhelming loneliness that this part was feeling. It was a really heart-wrenching story. So then we move into the do-over. The do-over is going to be a corrective experience. Kind of cool. And if we get to it today, and if we don't, that's okay. But this is what happens with the EMDR and reconsolidation. You need a corrective experience in order for the re-encoding to actually kick in. And if you guys have worked with me before, you might be like, oh my gosh, Paula talks about that all the time. If you've never heard me talk about it, that's okay too. But Bruce Eckert basically explains how EMDR works, and it's right here, a juxtaposition of a corrective experience. Okay, went off topic. So our corrective experience, now the higher self asks the lonely part, what did you need back then that you didn't get? And together they create a new memory, a corrective experience filled with protection and love and belonging. For the first time, Lonely felt truly seen and heard and understood and cared for in a way she had never felt before. And so together they created this new experience. Step 3, retrieval. So retrieval, once the new memory was firmly held in the hearts of all, higher self, and the new memory of what the loneliness needed, then we created what the loneliness would prefer. So in this particular situation, this client goes to a lot of concerts. And so her space, her safe place was to go to a concert. And everybody's would be different. It could be, you know, a peaceful place. It could be a hike, or it could be anything, I guess. It could be a dance studio. It all depends on what it is that the client enjoys as an adult. And so the lonely part gets to pick. And so self brings the exiled part, the lonely part, out of the traumatic scene into a safe space of their choice. Now, when I do this, I use bilateral. I have the buzzies going, and I have the client telling me the story of grabbing the little one's hand. It's kind of like a Peter Pan thing, even though I've never really seen that movie, and pulling the exile into present day orientation. There's a lot of ways we can do this. We can have movies being shown. If you do meeting place, there's a lot of different ways. But in this particular example, the higher self grabbed the little girl's hand and brought her into this concert experience where there was a lot of love and there was a lot of life, and the concert hall was alive with music and light and joy and connection. And so that's what retrieval is. Not sure where they come up with this language. And then our fourth step is to unload. And this is where the exile, where Lonely releases her burdens. So at the concert, surrounded by joyful energy, Lonely part began to dance. And as the music soared, she lifted up her arms, and together self released the deep burdens of that went upward into the glowing angelic sky, where the weight of the sorrow transformed into freedom and hope and light. And so you want to make sure that the part releases everything. And the part gets to pick how they release the burdens. We have all kinds of burdens that are released through fire, through water, through the air, through the earth. I had a client that actually made a basket with a balloon and brought it in because she put her burdens in the balloon, and the balloon went off into the sky. And so she spent all weekend creating an art project. We have rockets that go out into space and orbit. So at the end of the day, we can be really creative with this. It's really what the client wants. Just one more example, the burden. I had a client who had the burden of what the Catholic Church put on her. And so she she skipped down the aisle in her first communion dress. She dumped all of the burdens at the feet of who was on the altar. She skipped out, threw her hat in the air, and it turned into a dove and flew away. Like, clients come up with some really cool things. And if they can't, that's fine. But it's really incredible how our imagination can assist in this type of work. And then we go to step 5, which is the invitation. Now that the client has let free the burdens, there's a space here. And the space, now we want to invite, what is it that you didn't get? What is it that you would prefer for your authentic self? What are the things that you would like? And so we're looking at healthy boundaries. We're looking at making self a priority. We're looking at independence without fear. So the lonely part wants to receive all of these. And so once again, we're just envisioning this embracing and installing. And if you guys, EMDR therapists, once again, doing inside out, outside in resourcing wheels, we're going to slowly strengthen and enhance anything and everything that the client would like to embrace in this space. And then last but not least is going to be the integration. And integration is now the system stands together. The lonely part, the angry part, the overeating part, and they're no longer trapped in their old roles. We've got the higher self standing with them, connected by light, trust, and love. The part knows that they are not alone. They're not stuck. They're not broken. They belong together as a whole. The end. So there you have it. I also threw together, and I'm going to stop this for questions. Actually, we're going to take a 2-minute break because I've got a issue out in front of my place. But I want you to think about what kind of questions you have. I'm going to put this slide up. These are integration questions, and I will be right back, and then I'll take questions. So Eric, take it away.
Everybody, I'm going to mute Paula in case any loud noises come through. Think about your questions and take a look at this. And if you need a little break, go ahead and grab some water, grab whatever you need.
Okay, did we come up with any questions?
Nothing's coming up in the chat right now, but I do
Okay.
really like how you walk through that.
Yeah, I'd love some feedback. So for any of you that are available, if you could send Eric just a chat real quick to let me know if that was helpful, because I find this stuff difficult. And you know me, I'm a teacher and I want to make sure that I'm teaching. And that was the best thing I could come up with. So I'm just curious as to your thoughts. So if you don't mind sending in your thoughts, that would be very helpful for me. I know I could get one from you, Patricia. Or you could just unmute yourself too, since we talk every week now anyway.
Okay. Well, I wanted to say that story was it was so beautiful, but it was such an education.
Mhm.
And the way that you told the story was so beautiful. And do we get a recording of this?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that was
Yes.
I would probably listen to that over and over again. And I guess at the same time, I find Frank's books are great and Schwartz's books are great. But I find it a little bit frustrating that the level 1 training, and I'm just going to put this out there because as an adult who has always, well, I'm not even go there, but I find it a little frustrating that you're told, well, here is all this wonderful information, but it's going to cost you $3,000 to do the level 1 training once you finally get there.
Yeah, I hear
No,
you.
I mean, I just, and I actually, in sensory motor psychotherapy, it's the same thing, except that's
Yeah.
$5,000. And I find it so, I know everyone has to earn a living, and it's up to everyone to decide what they want to charge for what they provide as
Right.
education. But I find it to be very transactional.
Mm-hmm.
And while we talk about a lot of higher self energy, it's just ridiculous to me.
Yeah, I hear you. And you know me, that's why I am determined to be able to teach this because I agree with you. And also, I don't know that, the trainings, at least in the United States, are not complex trauma informed. And 95%, maybe even higher, of our clients are very complex.
Right.
They're so complex. Like, it's insane how complex. Nobody's even talked about how to work with dissociation here, and that's what shows up first. So instead of and so you and I are on the same page here. This story was put together over a long time with a lot of the details because I know the client really well. We did it together. She's studying to be a therapist, and so she is thoroughly aware of what we're doing here. And so I just appreciate the fact that the story can help, because in my world, in order for us to really be able to learn something, we have to be able to do it and to be in it. And so I kind of hope that, especially with the overeating, I thought that really kind of hit a lot of checked a lot of boxes for people, because I think that a lot of people struggle with whatever their eating habits are. So okay, all right.
Hey, and Paula, there are a couple of things coming up in the chat. Please excuse me, Patricia. Just jumping in. With regards to the immersion, this chapter is very complicated and really expanded on, in addition to the chapters that are coming are also expanding on this. So this chapter alone is not sufficient and is actually very overwhelming. So that's one of the comments I just want to support. I'll just read it. I did wonder about the stage of invitation after the observation. Would that also be the place for a different kind of invitation before retrieval, maybe? And I think I'm doing justice to what that comment is.
Yeah, no, I totally know. So if you do Phoebe, I'm going to forget her last name. She's the only one out there that has she has an EMDR shame training. Once you've removed the shame, you replace it with what you would prefer for yourself. Remember that language from EMDR? What you would prefer for yourself. And we literally do it by doing an outside-in resourcing wheel by what are the things that you didn't get. I didn't learn to hold boundaries. I was so traumatized as a kid. I never learned anything. I wanted to be a musician, and now I'm learning guitar. What are the things that you would like to replace all that attachment in service of survival space with, that will speak to who you want to be today? And so we literally invite the client. We, of course, will help them with some ideas, but what is it that you would like for yourself? And then we do an inside out strength resourcing wheel, and we have them literally envision, and I use bilateral while they're doing this, to bring that and put that in the space where the shame, or where the part was housed, because it's energy. So does that help? Does that make sense? So you're literally taking something out and then you're putting something back in. And that's what the invitation is.
It makes sense to me. I'm not commenting for the person that wrote it. I think you did a good job there. Here's another comment. Yes, it's very helpful. It's hard sometimes to know how to care well for exiles. Using loving eyes as an example that fits into the sequence so perfectly. Also recognizing that EMDR is right in line with the do-over steps helps understand how better everything works together.
Mhm. The key to the exile, where the turning point is when the exile has everybody's full attention and it can tell its story. That's the key. That's where the shift is right there. You've got, because the protectors don't allow us to get to the exile. Think of the exile in that castle. And now what we've done is everybody has gone to the castle. They're in the castle. They're all in their chairs, paying attention. And the exile has the stage. And the exile is sharing. It's literally pouring its heart out around its story. And everyone is just there holding it with verbal and nonverbal love and support. So that is the turning point. That is how we treat an exile. It is a very, very young part. It's only going to share with you what it can put language to. If you have a nonverbal exile, that's a different part of the, I don't know if that's a different chapter, I think. We only have one chapter left, so maybe he doesn't get to that, but that is the turning point.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Hey, here's another one. And again, there's 22 chapters in the book before this, plus loads of other trainings. So I'll allude to them.
Yeah, just put that question out there.
Here's the question. How do you handle clients who don't have any childhood memories or are very fragmented ones and become very dysregulated when you ask about accessing memories or very quick to shut it down?
That is why they don't have the memories. So when we have parts that use dissociation as a way to protect the client, basically the castle's boarded up. So it doesn't, you need to get the protector to literally take the boards down. So it just tells you that there's a lot there, and we are not, with EMDR, we can bust through those doors if we want with long sets of bilateral. You set a light bar up and you have a remote control, you can basically barrel through all the protectors and the door that's boarded up to get to the exile, and you're going to have a mess on your hands. But when you have client that doesn't have memories, it's for a reason. So you want to start working with the protectors, and the protectors are going to be the ones that are in charge of the amnestic barriers.
Yeah.
And the memories will start to come a little bit at a time.
Again, that balance of authenticity and attachment, we're reworking all of that.
Yeah, the thing that I found easy about internal family systems is you can only work with the energy that's in front of you. You know, I find this easier than EMDR, because EMDR is like, make a list and go work on that target. You know, internal family systems, it's like, hey, how can I help you today? Oh, I'm super pissed off at my partner. Okay, tell me about that. What's coming up for you? Well, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm sad. Oh, well, let's pick one of those parts or one of those aspects of self to start with. Which one would you like to start with? I want to start with anger. Okay, and then I'm going to move right into direct access with anger. So anger, tell me about yourself. Like, what anger? Oh my gosh, when I get angry, no, angry's scary. We can't get, I don't want to talk about anger. So you work with what's in front of you. And by the way, most clients don't like to talk about anger. It's because it's scary. And then we work with the scary part first. It's layers and layers and layers of energy, and you just go with the energy that's in front of you. And once you get used to that, it really, I promise, it becomes so much easier. My internal family system sessions are going beautifully right now, and I integrate EMDR every chance I get. But we got to figure out our internal family systems first, which is why I'm here.
Hey,
Yep.
here's another question that just popped up regarding the questions on the screen that you're showing right now.
Yes.
Where would these questions come into play in the healing process? Are these questions happening during unburdening?
This is at the end of the session. This is an integrate. These are questions that I used to put these on cards and have the client just pick one to kind of make it fun. And so here you finished up whatever work you finished up. Let's say you just worked with the two angry parts. The anger part, you know, I got to tell the story because it's really important. When I started working with that overeating part, it came into session one day and it's like, you know, this is, I'm just going to swear because that's what I do. The part said it was a he. This is bullshit. He's like, there's a part out there that wants to kill me and none of you guys are taking this seriously. And so, you know, I'm a therapist, right? I'm like, okay, all right, tell me about this. And so I did a meeting place. You know, I've been doing this for a while. So we did a meeting place. So it's true. If there was a part that wanted this part to die, it didn't want the client to overeat. There was no compromise. It wanted that part out of there. And until we went and found the part that wanted to kill it, we couldn't get anywhere. And isn't that interesting? Because that part did not show up. Nobody talked about that part. That's not acceptable. We don't kill, you know, kill parts. But the overeating part said, it was pissed. And so the brain knows. It's just like EMDR. We have to trust the process. The brain knows what the problems are. And we just need to be able to take each issue and turn it into a little person. That's what Dick Short says. And work with that person that's right there in front of you. Okay. Anyway, I'm not answering the question. You pick one of these. How do you now make sense of this journey? So in other words, what we did today, how are you making sense of this? Or we can do a redo. Imagine how life would be different now, knowing these parts are no longer carrying these old burdens. So in other words, how can anger and overeating part behave differently toward each other? Or imagine yourself moving forward. What would you do differently based on what we've done today? All of these questions are based on what it is that they've learned either today or about the journey so far with the parts that they're working on. And that's what integration is. It's when we take what we've done in our session and we integrate it into our life. We call it rescripting and rehearsing. So rehearsing a positive belief that you now hold about yourself. You know, the client's able to embrace something different. How would that look going into their next week between now and the next time you saw them? Does that make sense? They're just ideas on how the client can leave the session. Summarizing. Okay. Any other questions?
Not right now. I do, just due to time, I wonder how you would just sort of give a summary to this chapter personally. If you were to say, hey, here's how healing works.
So the summary to this chapter is it's jumping in once you've gotten past all the protector parts, which is a really big ask for complex trauma. And it's saying this is what you do when you get to the exile. All right. These are the steps. And I'll just go back up and put the steps up there. So these are the steps. First, we want the exile to be able to be witnessed around that story. So the exile says, you know, I've been lonely my whole life. I was raised by alcoholic parents. I never got taken care of. My mother even thinks it's funny because she drank when she was pregnant with me. Then when my dad died, nobody ever talked about it. You know, and I basically married somebody who wasn't emotionally available. Like, it's a lifetime of loneliness. And the part gets to tell that story any way it wants. Once that has happened, you want it witnessed by the higher self. And the higher self is going to say, oh my gosh, I so hear what you're saying, understand what you're saying. I get what you're saying. I see what you're saying. I like hugs. It makes it easy. And so that's witnessing. Once that part feels witnessed, then you say, what would you have preferred? I would have preferred that someone loved me. I would have preferred that someone took care of me. I would have preferred that somebody kept me safe, that they weren't drunk all the time. That's what I would have preferred. And then the retrieval is, where would you like to go? I'd take you anywhere you want, present day. Where would be a great place for us to go together right now? And so this particular client wanted to take her younger part to a concert. You want the younger part to be taken to a place that's going to exhibit what it is that she wants for herself. So a lot of times my clients will bring their younger parts to see their pets. They'll give them a tour of the safe environment they live in. They'll take their younger parts to the park with their children. And once again, like the clients come up with answers. They have answers for these things. We just have to ask the question. So then you literally take that younger part and you take it out of trauma time and pull it into present time. And then you have the younger part release what it was, all of those burdens around being alone, around drunken parents, around dad dying. You release it all in some way, shape, or form. Once it's released, that's when you invite the new authentic qualities in. And then you're looking for an integration, which is the integration questions were examples. That's how I would basically summarize this chapter 23.
The starting point that was so important for what you just said is that once you have gotten through all of, and by the way, for me these days, I'm working diligently to not use the word protector because it's been very strongly changed since Schwartz's original language. So I'm using managerial aspects of self. Once you've figured out many of the managerial aspects of self, then here is the healing work for those more fundamental aspects and exiles that have been left out on their own.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's important to say that even though there are rows and rows and rows of protectors or managerial, the word you use, that a lot of times if we focus on one situation like overeating, that you can get to that exile and that then you need to know what to do. I think that that's what took me by surprise. In my own IFS work, first of all, I've been doing EMDR for years with a therapist that I met before I became EMDR certified. And we never got to my exiles. So EMDR, if it, whatever, I teach it. We never got to the exiles. I only got to the exiles through my own internal family systems work. And I was shocked to learn that. And also, once we were let in to start working with them, they started showing up one after another. And now it's like a no-brainer to find an exile. So just know that it's like any work that we do. It's long-term. And as the system starts to trust you, things start to go a lot quicker. It's in the beginning that it's the hardest. And that's when we're learning anyway. So working to get through those layers, looking at polarized parts, the part that says, I want to drink every day because life sucks. And the part that says you can't drink because you're getting a DUI. The part that says, I got to get a divorce. You can't get a divorce. You have 4 children that are relying on you. Polarized. We have to work through that first. And then underneath that is where the exile is. It becomes linear in some respects once you get used to the patterns. Yeah. And just like anything, and Patricia can tell you this, I get super excited and passionate and motivated when things start to make sense. And this is starting to make sense to me. So I'm just trying to share that with you guys. I don't know what the level 1 looks like or the level 2 or, how other people's journeys are going with complex trauma. But if I can make sense out of this, and I'm an EMDR basic trainer, and I'm going to get my polyvagal certificate this summer, I feel like I'll be in a good space to really continue to help teach this. Yeah. Okay. We're going to stop there. Any final thoughts, questions? Anybody want to jump in? I'm going off to Dr. Susie Mathiasen and my EMDR 2.0 training right after this. Very excited, even though I've already done it. I'm doing it again for